Oh, I love that intro. Gets you going. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today is June 22nd, 2022. We have a great show today, but as usual, I'm joined by Western Standard news editor Dave Naylor. Dave, you managed to get your tie on?
The tie was no problem. The mic was a little bit iffy, but I think we're good to go.
I know you're new to media, but I'm showing you the ropes around here. You'll get used to it.
Appreciate it.
And also joined by Western Standard opinion and broadcast editor Cory Morgan, who always struggles with his tie.
Yes, and it's just not going to stop at this point. If I haven't gotten it by this age, we'll just need.
He refuses to get good ties. I even gave him a tie budget, and he refuses to use it.
I don't get a tie budget.
Yeah, it's because you had good ties.
Oh, okay.
He didn't. And he just doesn't even use it. I shouldn't have mentioned that. Now everyone's... Crap, all the employees are going to hear that there was a tie budget offered. I was joking. That was a lie. I didn't mean any of it. All right. Well, we've got a couple of great topics today. Danielle Smith, UCP leadership candidate, pitching the Alberta Sovereignty Act. This is a very, very interesting, at the minimum, an interesting piece of legislation that she's proposing in her campaign to become UCP leader and premier of Alberta. We're going to talk about what that means because, boy, if something like that became law, it's going to mean big things, not just here in Alberta. It's going to have massive national consequences. Speaking of the UCP, the United Conservative Party has cleared federal Conservative MP Michelle Rempel Garner to seek the leadership of the United Conservative Party, clearing a major hurdle. I think we're going to see her in the race. We're going to talk about what happened there. And, well, just another day in the life of... the federal government. The Liberals and RCMP have been exposed playing very, very nasty gun politics, using the massacre, one of the biggest mass murders, if not the biggest mass murder in Canadian history, from Nova Scotia, recall just a few years ago. New information has come to light showing the Liberals and RCMP in deep cahoots to exploit that tragedy for political ends, in order to build political support for banning what the Liberals call assault-style military weapons. These words don't even matter to them. And excellent news, the Western Standard's Conservative leadership debate is officially on June 8th. We're going to talk about that, what we expect when the Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidates come to Cowtown to duke it out here, because we're going to be talking about Western issues. Before we get in, though, we got to thank one of my all-time favorite sponsors, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. We're going to get into a bit, but as I just mentioned off the top, politicians and even the police, the federal police, the RCMP in Canada, are willing to exploit things as tragic as the biggest mass murder in Canadian history for their political ends. Now we've got the proof of it. We have no denial from the RCMP. These people are willing to do disgusting things to further their political end of taking away the right of law-abiding citizens to own guns in Canada. And standing between the politicians and you and your guns is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. This is a critical organization fighting on the front lines for your right to keep, own, and safely use firearms in Canada. Without the CSSA, they probably would have already had our guns by now. That's why I'm a member of the CSSA and have been for well over a decade. You should become one. You should learn more about them. Check out their website. Cory, what is it?
CSSA-cila.org.
Check them out. I strongly recommend you be a member. Firearms rights in Canada have never been at more risk than they are right now, and we're just getting a really good sense. We're going to talk about this more in, a little further down in the show. But firearms, these people are willing to do anything. There is no level to which they will not stoop to exploit tragedy to take away and punish the rights of legal firearms owners in Canada. How's that for a sponsorship endorsement?
Good stuff.
Okay. Well, let's jump right into it. Danielle Smith pitches the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Dave, what is the Alberta Sovereignty Act?
Basically, she promises if she becomes premier, she will introduce such an act that will basically disregard everything that Ottawa does that could hurt Alberta. Basically going up to the I think you said it this morning, the line of separation and spitting over it. Very, very strong statement. certainly the strongest out of any candidate we've seen so far. And she followed it up today with a vow no more lockdowns. If she becomes premier, she will not lock down anything. If there's another pandemic, churches will still go, schools will open, and life will be as normal. So two very interesting proposals out of Danielle in the first week. I think are certainly making her stand out from her rivals. Brian Jean announced some sort of program on lowering electrical costs, but was kind of short on detail. But this Sovereignty Act is huge. If it's brought in, it'll change the face of politics in Canada. Mm-hmm. It's that big.
So we're going to have to dive into this because there's not a lot of parallel. Quebec has done things like this, but they never put it in law. Quebec has disregarded federal law many, many times before, but it's Quebec. They get a pass on it all the time. So they haven't really felt the need to enshrine this in legislation. But Cory, let's try to flesh out what this act really means. So Alberta is going to disregard federal laws. What does that look like practically?
Well, I mean, it's taking an offense rather than a defense for a change, actually. It's spoiling for a scrap and saying we're coming in and we're just going to state where we're standing instead of reacting when you do something, because we know you're gonna.
Yeah, well, that's around let's get to the politics after, but I want to talk about what is the practical effect of this? What does this mean?
For example, if they want to come and seize our firearms, well, this is much more justified saying, you know what, we're ending the RCMP contract right now. We will not enforce your Firearms Act. That's your problem. What are you going to do about it? Or if it's a healthcare issue where there's dispute, same sort of thing. Well, what are you going to do about it? I would almost call it the what are you going to do about it law. Like, we aren't going to cooperate. We aren't going to help you with this. We aren't going to help you lock down here if you bring in health restrictions. What are you going to do about it? That's the big question that hangs with that law. Like it's as you said, it's spitting over that line and leaves it to them. And you know what? As you said, Quebec never needed to do that act because they just do it. And basically say that to the government. What are you going to do about it? The government always says, well, we'll talk a lot. We won't do anything about it. So we're trying that gambit here, or she would, or says she would.
So essentially, it's just more or less the province refusing to enforce federal law. I'm a bit more confused about how this would go in terms of effectively having different law, actively doing something. I'm not sure, we can't bring in stuff. We can't add things to the criminal code, for example, because the criminal code is federal. That Ottawa doesn't have, but we can essentially subtract from it. So the way I read it as a very practical example is on firearms. That's very obviously relevant right now. The provincial government could just say Section X, Y, and Z of the Firearms Act are violations of the rights of Albertans. We're just not enforcing it. And that means an Alberta provincial police force doesn't arrest people for it. Crown prosecutors don't prosecute for it, effectively nullifying federal powers there. I think that the what are you going to do about it part, I think really the only way I can see practically that if Alberta just refused to do what Ottawa says on these fronts, what option do they have? What can they do?
Well, lawyers are going to get rich. No doubt about that.
Yeah, but you can't make the government do it without, how do you force? And I'm emphasizing the word force because the only way I can see practically is if a province just says, crosses their arms and says, I'm not doing it. The only way I can see that is, Ottawa to declare Alberta to be in a state of insurrection and send the army. And that sounds absurd, obviously.
But, I don't think she's putting in there anything that Quebec doesn't have, right?
Yeah.
And the government's has let Quebec get away with it for, time in memoriam. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's what she's hoping, that if Alberta says, look, we're just doing the same thing as Quebec, what are you going to do about it?
The thing is, we want to do it on different issues. Quebec likes to do things that violate the rights of the Anglophone minorities or Muslims.
Sure, and they're big on immigrants and
they want to beat up on Muslims and Anglophones. That's kind of the popular thing in Quebec. Whereas here, it's more or less we don't want to enforce federal law, which is maybe around firearms and restrictions and all sorts of things like that. Is there, Cory, is there really anything Ottawa can do short of send in the army if we refuse to enforce federal law?
They could cut transfer payments, but that I would see that being the first step to Alberta saying, that's fine, we're collecting all our own taxes now, we're not sending them out to you. So now you can come begging to us.
And that's something Quebec could never really do because they're a net recipient.
Yeah. So again, it's spoiling for the fight. It forces their hand, and I'm it's very interesting. The thing I showed concern though on the show today, and in a column I got coming, is this is going to sell with the UCP membership. I can see to a good degree, but I'm not sure how keen the Alberta electorate's going to be on this. Much of a in-your-face attitude. That's what's going to see.
And it shows you how little Jason Kenney did on the file in 3 years. He talked a good game, but really didn't do anything.
Well, we saw virtually nothing from the Fair Deal panel. Was weak enough in itself, but it had some great ideas, but it really stopped short of a lot of what a lot of us were hoping for. And it still did virtually none of it, except for, again, we're back to guns. They appointed an Alberta chief firearms officer. That was it. Nothing else.
It held a referendum on equalization.
Yeah, and then did nothing.
Yeah.
Like, that was the end of it.
Should have been on the plane the next day.
Yeah. Okay, well, since you opened the door, Dave, let's talk about what she said about lockdowns. And this is interesting. Obviously, there's tremendous frustration with the Kenney government with lockdowns and mandates and things like that. She said she'll bring in an amendment to the Human Rights Act, which would enshrine medical choice around this stuff. She said a line I've used before, which is, I'm not pro-choice for just a single thing. I'm pro-choice for everything. And that's why with the exception of people like Cory, I just generally don't call these people pro-choice anymore, because they mean one choice and no choices for anything else. So she's talking about choices around vaccines, but also an end to lockdowns. Even I know some of our viewers are going to be angry at me for this, but I can see a situation where we've got the next Black Death. The plague is here. The kind of thing these laws were really meant to do for a pandemic with high casualty rates, not just among seniors with multiple comorbidities, but it kills the young, it kills the children, it kills the healthy. I can see a situation, not that we've ever experienced it in this our life, in many generations, but I could see in that kind of situation, a break glass in case of situation where a lockdown could theoretically be justified. And I know some people are going to scream at me right now that I'm a lockdowner. No, I'm about as anti-lockdown as you get. But there is the theoretical situation where that, I think, could be justified. Is this throwing out the baby with the bathwater, or is this just a case of, yeah, maybe it's justified sometimes, but the government abuses the power too much, so we just have to take away that government's power?
Well, I think Albertans' frustration with Jason Kenney was he kept moving the goalposts, kept changing it. Best summer ever. No, we're locking down. Oh, best winter ever. No, we're locking down. I think what Danielle's saying is, okay, well, no more lockdowns for COVID-like pandemics, right? COVID basically was severe flu-like thing.
Well, she said no lockdowns ever.
Yes, but I think it would be her prerogative if the Black Death does come back to change her mind. Right? But it's just hypothetical. I guess we'd have to question her about
it. But if they remove that government power, that means it's not there then.
True. But again, I think you're talking hypothetical. Hopefully, something that never happens. But she has found future. She said never again. So, but I think in a case of the Black Death, she could say, well, you know what, I've changed my mind. Jason Kenney did a few times.
Yeah, but then you'd have to if she outright takes away the government's power, and I'm very open to anti-lockdown legislation. Governments clearly have abused that power over the last 2.5 years. They cannot be trusted with that power. I'm just worried that if we formally remove the power, if and when the real one comes, we're going to be left without an appropriate response. Cory, do you think this... Is it too far? And I can't believe I'm saying this, because I always want politicians going way further than
I'm kind of with Dave with it. It's a good solid statement and everything, but if we really suddenly had this thing going around that had something like a 10% mortality rate, people are terrified and hospitals are truly overloaded, all the stuff we were warned was going to happen really starts happening. It's just like there used to be a Balanced Budget Act. It used to be illegal not to balance the budget. All the government has to do is throw out a new law, majority votes on it, and it changes. And in that circumstance, I don't think she would have to pay a terrible price, because the public would be terrified in such a dire thing. And as a gesture, though, it still looks good, because they're not going to do it for the sniffles. They're not going to do it for something minor. She also addressed the lack of ICU capacity. So she was being realistic and saying this might happen. We might get another wave. We might have problems. So we've got to address how we're going to deal with it without locking down. So I think she's been pretty smart about this. But again, she's got to be careful if she treads into that anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine type camp, which say Bernier, cornered. Very strong supporters, very dedicated, but there's a solid cap on that. Then you get 10, 15% and you can't get past there. So she's got to watch who she's courting, but it's an interesting tactic.
And I'll just mention before we move on, Brian Jean had something on this, I think much, much softer, but said, after 60 days of lockdowns, there'd have to be a vote in the legislature. I mean, that's an improvement over now where there's just literally the cabinet says it and the legislature has no say, and that there have to be an automatic inquiry after for this kind of thing. So, more of accountability additions to it, which would be an improvement on the current system. But I think a fair bit softer than Danielle's more thermonuclear approach, which is the government can't be trusted with it, take away their powers.
Exactly.
That's generally where my instinct would be, is you just can't trust them with this stuff. Okay. So in the UCP leadership race, really the only big question hanging over the field right now is Michelle Rempel-Garner. I think all the major candidates are in. We had an exclusive story from the Western Standard's Rachel Emanuel that, actually quite a few weeks ago, that she was seeking an exemption because she was like 2 or 3 weeks short for the 6 month. You have to have your membership for 6 months before then. And these things actually do lapse. It's pretty regular to grant these kinds of exemptions. Jason Kenney needed an exemption to run for UCP leader. He's like the primary founder of the party. He needed one. When I was entering politics, I needed an exemption to run for the Wild Rose. These things are routinely given. You generally only don't give it unless it's more or less like, that guy's crazy and we want an excuse to keep him off the ballot. She needed
and
one.
You still got in, huh?
They still let me through. I mean,
Unbelievable.
holy, shows you how crazy Wild Rose was back in the day, that I was the not crazy guy. Yeah. Anyway, Michelle Rempel's needed an exemption. There was a meeting just the other day. We had the scoop on the story.
We did.
What happened?
Rachel's had a couple of good scoops on it. The election committee, or whatever they want to call themselves, offered up, if any MLAs, UCP MLAs wanted to talk about it and want to throw in their 2 cents, they were welcome to. Apparently 13 out of 17 MLAs didn't want the exemption to be given. But at the end of the day, they did. So she is now, Michelle Rempel-Garner, is now free to enter the race if she wants to.
That's actually, we're still the only media reporting that. No one else has been able to confirm that for days now. We're the only ones with it. Hopefully we're right.
Yes.
Corey, 13 of the 17 or so MLAs who spoke were all against allowing her to run. I think we published the names, at least according to the sources that were speaking with the Standard. And all of those MLAs have endorsed, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they've all endorsed either Travis Taves, former Kenney finance minister, or Rebecca Schultz, who was Kenney's child services minister, although she's not really as inner circle as Taves was. Do you think there's any coincidence that these MLAs who were saying she should not run are...
Yeah, no, the establishment doesn't want more candidates coming into the mix. Though I don't know if that's not strategically that wise a move. I mean, if we've got a lot of alternatives diluting that vote over there, it might leave a better field for people like Taves, who have a solid but perhaps hard cap on their support, or Schultz if she's trying to slide up as a second choice sort of thing. But they're fearful of Rempel, or otherwise they wouldn't want to stop it. I mean, if it was a star candidate they really wanted, they'd put a thumbs up. It's a rather arbitrary rule, I think.
Well, I think in general, you'd only really will oppose them if they're going to be eating your votes and not someone else's. I think Rempel, I'm not sure if this will play out or not, but the Wild Rose wing of the party has 2 former Wild Rose leaders running in it. So the Wild Rose side of the party's got a pretty crowded field right now. The more progressive conservative side, even though Travis Taves wasn't a progressive conservative politician, I think he's viewed as coming a bit more from that progressive conservative tradition. Michelle Rempel, federal conservative, I think probably she's hard to peg. Like on some issues, she kind of seems like a Wild Rose, and on other issues, she very much seems like a very progressive conservative, depending on the issue, depending on the day. But I think she's probably perceived as coming more from the progressive conservative side. And that would be eating into Travis Taves' votes, because you didn't see really any opposition from MLAs backing Brian Jean. I'm not sure if there's any MLAs backing Danielle Smith in the caucus right now, but there's at least Dave Hansen, maybe one or two others who are backing Brian Jean. None of them were speaking against Danielle. You really only saw it from the Travis Days and Rebecca Scholl's side. Dave, do you think is that it? Just that they want to keep the more kind of former PC side more open to themselves?
Of course, very mercenary. Anything that will lead away their vote, they don't want them anything to do with the race. So yeah, it's as Cory said, the establishment playing politics again.
Okay, well, let's talk on what the effect of it is. I think we've already set up a little bit of it, but let's take for granted now Michelle Rempel Garner's in. Actually, we just had news. This wasn't from the Standard today. I think it was one of the wire services, maybe Canadian Press or Associated Press, broke that the chairman of the Patrick Brown campaign has quit that to come and chair Michelle's campaign. She's totally in. She's not officially in, but she's jumped off the dock. She's underwater. She just hasn't emerged to say I'm in yet. But she's in. What kind of effect, Cory, do you think Michelle is going to have? How big a contender is she going to be to actually win this? Because it's a pretty big field.
I don't know. That's a tough question. It really is. I mean, she's got some profile. She's definitely got some connections. I guess it depends. Like, there's part of what the establishment's worried about too. I mean, there's a lot of shared support between the federal and provincial conservatives. She's going to be dipping into the fundraising pools of Taves and Scholl's and others as well. I mean, they're the same people often you're going to. So she's going to split that up. It really depends on how her campaign's managed. It's so hard to speculate. I mean, what sort of ground is she going to kind of corner? As you said, she's one of the hardest ones to pin down. I mean, she's made some statements on Twitter that sounded like a woke NDPer. And on the other hand, she's talked about things like the Buffalo Declaration, where she sounds like the most conservative of Wildrosers. So to try and see where she's going to land, she could very well be competitive, but we can't really speculate till we see what she's going to do. It's an hard one.
I think on name recognition alone, she gets into the top four right now. And her political organizational ability is very good. Her writing, one of the top Tory writings in the country in terms of organization. So if she can, use that organization to help her run provincially, she may have a chance. But just right at the start, name recognition gets her a lot of media attention, and I think it puts her in a good place to start.
She's a contender.
She is a killer organizer. The mainstream media pays a lot more attention, I think, than we do to for this kind of thing, the regional issues within Alberta politics. Calgary, Edmonton, rural being really everything outside, so the north and the south. And that has had an impact in the past. Ed Stelmach was seen as kind of a rural northern rebellion to kind of being on the outside of the PC party. The conservative leaders traditionally come from Calgary, though. It's been dominated by Klein. Lougheed was Calgary. What's his nuts?
Klein.
But between Getty. Getty was Edmonton.
Getty was
But other than Getty, it was Lougheed, Calgary, Klein, Calgary. You had Stelmach, rural north, but then back to Redford, Calgary, Prentice, Calgary, and Kenny, Calgary. So it's very Calgary dominant. Also, Calgary kind of being the fulcrum of the politics of the province. You have rural right, Edmonton left. Sorry, Edmonton. And then Calgary is where elections are decided. And so, and it's where the biggest money is. It's where a lot of the political power is based. Cory, how big a factor do you think it's going to be that she's kind of the big? So there's Rebecca Scholl's here, but really Rempel is going to be the big Calgary candidate. Is that how big an advantage is that going to be? Do conservative members here think, yeah, I want a Calgary leader, or is it more? It could also be, well, we need a Calgary leader because we need to win the Calgary seats.
I don't think the members think that strategically, really, as a whole. I mean, a few will. But for the most part, I think her advantage of being in Calgary is just that you're in a spot with good, strong conservative base anyways. You're in person where it's a one-member, one-vote deal here. There's no regional weighting or anything. So a person can win by concentrating memberships in just one region rather than being forced to travel the whole area, which doesn't pay off in the long run in the general election, but for a leadership race could.
Ed
work out
Stelmach
well.
won like half of his votes were just like Ukrainians scattered around the rural north. I'm not joking. Like it was incredible. He just signed up Ukrainians and Ukraine took over Alberta.
If you can consolidate support somewhere, that's how it works. I mean, Stelmach wasn't resonating well in downtown Calgary, but he got the numbers. So Rempel Garner, I mean, she's got a lot of competition in Calgary in dealing with that, but she's got a solid base here. And I just don't think the members think so much strategically that we need a Calgary person in versus an Edmonton person as much. We're not as we certainly have our regional loyalties, but I don't know if they think about that in a leadership race.
And I think you have to give Danielle Smith honorary citizenship in Calgary. Her years on the radio, lived here, recently moved to High River.
So she's been in High River.
Yeah, she's been in
a
High
while
River for several years, but she's an honorary Calgarian.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That she largely counts as a Calgary, big Calgary presence, even though her bases tend to be the rural South and Central. But I think she's clearly a big personality here. Okay, before we move on, we need to thank our other sponsor. Who's going to thank our other sponsors? Corey's going to talk about Bitcoin Well for a second.
Talk about Bitcoin Well. Speaking of regional, local, good, solid Western companies, Bitcoin Well is one of those, and they're based just up in Alberta. Here, if you're looking to get into digital currencies, that's the thing, is being local, being trusted. There's a million services out there trying to tell you they can sell you their services. These guys are real. They're publicly traded. They have ATMs all across the country, actually, so that you can deposit into your Bitcoin account. They've set up e-transfers to make it as easy as possible. You can just get online, do your online banking transfer into your Bitcoin wallet, and they offer free one-on-one consultations with a real living, breathing person to explain what the digital currencies are all about and how they can serve you, what they can do for you. It's a great service if you're interested in digital currencies because you want to go in safely. And Bitcoin Well offers all of that, plus a lot of depth on their website to educate you on what Bitcoin's all about. So bitcoinwell.com.
All right, check them out. Okay, get ready to get angry again. So news broke, I think it was just yesterday, that the federal Liberal government, the RCMP, playing a little hanky-panky with gun politics. Tell us, give us the skinny on the little hanky-panky.
What was the name of the Halifax newspaper that broke it?
Chronicle Herald?
Examiner.
Halifax Examiner did a great job of they're covering the inquiry into the horrible shootings that left 22 people dead. What has happened was RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki contacted the investigators, contacted the police down there, and demanded to know what weapons were involved. So she could get it out, get it to the government, get it to Bill Blair, then the emergency minister, get it to Justin Trudeau.
Oh, he was public safety minister.
Public safety minister. Get it to the Prime Minister's office and Justin Trudeau, so they could basically play politics with it and get their gun laws passed and introduced. For me personally, if the Aga Khan vacation scandal was a 5, this is a 9.5. This is absolutely unbelievable, where you've got the nation's top police officer being politically involved, politically motivated for the PMO, for Justin Trudeau, for Bill Blair. Yet, unbelievably, there appears to be no sign of anybody writing out a resignation list. It's wild.
So there's a bit more background. We need to talk about this as well. The guns used by the Nova Scotia shooter, none of them were actually the ones that were banned when the Liberals brought in this cabinet order. Further, none of those guns were even legally bought in Canada. They were
smuggled in.
They were smuggled through the Maine border from the United States. They were smuggled guns. They were different guns, but the Liberals still demanded that this be brought out and spun in such a way as to give political impact so that the Liberals could say, aha, look, all these poor dead people, and we're banning the guns that did this. So even that's not true. Corey, is there going to be any price to pay here? Is this finally the one?
I hope so. I mean, this is where the NDP and the Conservatives should be demanding an independent inquiry. Get to the bottom of this. I mean, the quotes from the police officers said she promised the Prime Minister and Bill Blair that she was going to get this information for them. She took over the communications protocol.
And she didn't deny it.
No,
she did not deny this in her statement.
And I mean, a politicized commissioner of the police isn't actually new. They're appointed by the Prime Minister. They might go to ribbon cuttings with them and show a little leaning. That's fine, but meddling with an active investigation only hours after it happened. This is beyond the pale. Like, this is putting it at risk. And that's what some of these officers are saying. Like, they were trying to find the origin of these guns at that time. And they're saying, we've got to keep this tight because now we have it was an international investigation because they had found out they're from the United States. We can't leak this stuff right now. We can't let it out. And she wanted to. And they refused, to their credit. And she got upset about it. That's documented as well. And she was pressuring. And twice it's mentioned that it was on behalf, or at least pressured, by the Prime Minister's office and the Safety Minister. Now, this government loves throwing people under the bus. I won't be shocked to see Lucky
should be the one
tossed,
to go, obviously.
but I think the stronger thing we got to be looking at is a Prime Minister's office that tried to interfere on an investigation. We're not talking about a carjacking or something. We're talking about the biggest mass murder in Canadian history. And we're not talking a year later. We're talking in the hours just after they'd shot this guy. Like, this is incredibly dangerous political play. This is messing with a very important investigation, and we need to find out what the hell happened.
22 people get murdered in cold blood. And the first thing our nation's politicians think about is, how can we score some points on this one? Like, I mean, and you see this all the time, and there's mass shootings in the States. It's a bit more common there. People want to play politics right away. And both sides can be guilty of that. I think the anti-gun side seems to do it more. But the pro-gun side can do it as well. Like, well, every one of those teachers should have had a gun. I mean, like, no. Stop playing. A lot of people play politics with this right away. But it's rare to see it behind the curtains like this. We're seeing the sausage get made. We're seeing it done in the real dirty right now. We're just within hours. Like, so it was hours by the time it came down to the cops doing the investigation. That means this must have been right away for the politicians. Bill Blair, possibly Trudeau, I'm sure we'll never really know, but the politicians at the highest level must have immediately said, aha, we can make some political hay out of this. What should happen, Dave? Like, what needs to be the consequences?
Brenda
here?
Lucky should resign. In a perfect world, Trudeau, or at the very least, Bill Blair should resign. The full independent inquiry. But it's not going to happen. This is Canada. I mean, how many, going all the way back to SNC-Lavalin, how many scandals has this government had that in other parts of the world, any one of them would have brought down the government? But as news of this scandal is breaking, Trudeau's walking up the stairway into his nice little jet to fly off to Africa. So he misses yet another scandal. And he'll be over in Africa and Europe for a week or so.
He didn't even have to pretend to have COVID this time.
No. Sure, he'll have COVID when he gets back. But it's, it is, I think it's the single worst scandal of his prime ministership. And I'd be very doubtful if anything happens.
If Alberta needed another reason to get out of the RCMP, here's another one right now. It's clearly politicized from the highest levels of Ottawa. It's an Ottawa police force. There's tons of great RCMP cops. The RCMP officers on the ground in Alberta are overwhelmingly great men and women who I'm proud to have serve in the community. But they got the wrong bosses.
They can change uniforms.
Yep,
That can happen.
Yep.
we just slap a new badge on them. Welcome to the APP.
The rot is at the top.
All right. We'll have to stick the Alberta Rat Patrol on them. Okay, well, we're gonna finish up with this one. The Western Standard Conservative Party of Canada leadership debate is back on. We had originally planned this for the 9th of July during the Calgary Stampede. For that to take place under that program, we were very heavily reliant on a massive number of tickets, but without the participation of all the candidates, we had to downgrade the venue a bit so that we were less reliant on ticket sales. So we had originally canceled the 9th, but I think about 24 hours later, we brought her back on the 8th of July, and we're going to be having it at 3 p.m. at the Calgary Petroleum Club. So far confirmed, there's Jean Charest, Patrick Brown, Roman Baber, and Scott Atchison. Unfortunately, Leslyn Lewis wasn't able to make it, the rescheduling of it, and Pierre Poliver just didn't seem to confirm it.
He was probably going to be upset about the way you pronounce his name.
I can't do it.
Polyev.
Oliver.
And he's going to be the moderator.
You want to pronounce it out for me?
Polyev.
Polly.
Ev.
Say the whole thing.
Polyev.
Oliver.
Okay.
Okay. Why do you think he didn't? Oh, actually, I can't even ask you because you do know why. We just can't even have the inside talk here because I've already said we already know all this. We already know the skinny of it. But I think it's a shame. I think Polliver would have had a pretty welcome reception in Calgary. He's got a lot of support here. I think he's he's generally leading nationally, but I think really his support is probably most red hot here in Calgary.
And he's the best debater of the group. He's shown that in all his House of Commons skills and the debates that we've had. He's the best there is. I guess he's just afraid of making such a gaffe that it'll derail his campaign.
Well, he is going to be in for an interview with Cory here. But Cory, you're going to have to ask him why didn't you come? Why? Give me the answer.
Why?
Why didn't you come to the debate?
Why?
I'll do my best impression.
Why, Mr.
of it,
Polliver?
yes.
Why did you not come to the debate? Why?
I'll try and corner him on it.
You see what I did there? Huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Dave, Cory, thank you very much for joining me as usual, and thank all of you for joining us on the pipeline. We love your attention. Please like and share the video. Get it out. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, sign up now. It's only $10 a month or $99 a year. Go to westernstandard.news. Sign up, and you'll get unlimited access to all Western Standard content. You'll be helping to support bailout-free, so no government funding, independent Western media. If you don't support it, just not going to be here for you. Thank you very much for joining us, and God bless.